Welcome to session 6, where we're going to finish up, or Professor Krishna is going to finish up the exploration of living, section 26, 27, chapter 26, 27, 28, and 29, and then beginning of part 2, which is the exploration into learning, and that's chapter 30. So welcome, everyone, and I'll just turn it to Professor Krishna.
Thank you. I want to begin with the announcement that next Sunday there will be no session because that's a KFA gathering and many members may want to attend that, the programs there. So we'll be meeting after 2 weeks. And so I thought we should take up chapter 30 next time after 2 weeks, because that deals with education. And that whole exploration into learning is about education. So it would be nice to do that when we meet next time. So today I will discuss with you only what Krishnaji has said in the last 4 chapters of this session. That is 26, 27, 28, and 29. These sessions begin with the question of what we mean by order. Someone asked Krishnaji how to bring order to his own life. And he asked him, at what depth do you want order? And they discuss various types of order. There is the external order of arranging things in your house. In a neat and tidy way. There is the order of the army and the police, which is maintained by having rules. And anyone who doesn't follow the rule is punished. And so it is maintained through fear. And fear, of course, is psychological disorder. So there is that kind of order, external order. When one is only concerned with external order, then one is very impressed by all that. But it also creates fear, which is psychological disorder. So if one is interested in order in a more holistic sense, then you have to talk about both the psychological order inside and the order outside. Without what we call discipline instilled through fear. So he says the real meaning of discipline is when we use it in the sense of learning. Like we say, science is a discipline. Which discipline are you following in the learning about at university? And so on. That's about learning. Quite different from the discipline of the army. Then there is order in relationship. Human beings want relationships to be static. And they bring that about by prescribing duties. the role of the father, the role of the wife, the role of the son, the duties, and they are trained to perform their duties. So that is another kind of order, behavioral order, instilled through all these moral prescriptions of duties. And human beings struggle to perform their duty as best as they can, which often creates conflict between what they are and what they are supposed to do or be. And that conflict, of course, is psychological disorder. So there is external order at the expense of inner order. And so true holistic order must include both the inner and the outer. And we have seen earlier that there is not such a great difference between the inner and the outer. The inner enables the outer, and the outer creates the inner. At least the conditioning comes from the outer and comes into our inner through memory, through all these duties and prescriptions and so on, moral prescriptions and so on. There are the duties prescribed by religion. And if you have religious affiliation, you accept the authority of religion, of the teacher in that religion or the church. And that acceptance of authority and the attempt to follow that authority without having the wisdom of the teacher creates conflict again. And therefore you cannot really have order both outer and inner without coming upon wisdom. And wisdom is a different kind of learning, is a byproduct of a different kind of learning, which we have called self-knowledge. And that requires awareness of what is. We have gone into it in the previous sessions. This awareness is not a thought process. It includes sensory processes. It includes the mind as a sense. And therefore, to understand this whole content of consciousness, you have to watch it very diligently. And giving attention to it is important in order to understand it. And that attention is denied when we want to act on it through will and control ourselves according to certain ideas, which creates inner conflict and disorder. So there is this complication between inner order and outer order. In order to have a more holistic approach to order, it is imperative to come upon wisdom, which is a byproduct of self-knowledge. And that learning is not through reason and thinking, because reason and thinking are colored by our cultural conditioning, by our religious affiliations, and so on. And therefore, they don't point out what reality is. That's the difficulty of coming upon self-knowledge. Can one silence the thought process, which brings in the whole of your past and the conditioning, and watch without the interference of the observer? Now, one is trained into thinking that the observer is separate from the observed. But when you are looking at your own consciousness in order to understand yourself, the observer is the observed. It's different when you fall ill. Then there is an external germ that has got into your body and which disturbs the order of the body, which is the order of nature. And so you can take medicines, get rid of the germ, and come upon order. So physical order in the body can be restored by medicine. And you survive, and the order of nature, which is health, is restored. But the psychological disorder is not like that. The psychological disorder is also created by the observer, is within the observer. It's coming from his conditioning. Therefore, the observer is not separate from the observed, which means you cannot act on it with your will. There is a tendency to divide the consciousness into the conditioned part and the unconditioned part, and to imagine that the unconditioned part can act on the conditioned part and modify it. According to Krishnaji, that is an illusion. This separation of the observer from the observed is an illusion. It's a creation of one's identification with one's will and one's conditioning. And that is a source of conflict, because we have gone into it that the ego process is the root of all disorder and all conflict, both inner and outer. So that's not the way to come upon order. Therefore, it's a great challenge, because normally we are used to using our will and having an ideal which we want to practice and create. And we have been successful in doing that. You are able to externally do that. You can make a garden by having a plan, getting the tools necessary to give effect to that plan, learning the techniques and putting in effort to achieve that plan, and finally succeed. So the experience is that this is the process by which one brings order. And that's a process of achievement, which includes the ego. It has inherent in it disorder, because if something obstructs that from happening, it will resist, it will fight, and therefore violence will be born out of it, which is psychological disorder. And this whole division between what is and what should be is promoted by this approach. So if we can't follow that approach, then what do we have to do? If we realize that the use of thought in order to free oneself of the interference of the conditioning is an illusion, that thought cannot do this, then thought ceases at least for this purpose. You can use thought for other purposes which are achievable through thought, but psychological order is not achievable through thought and through reason. What other faculty do we have? The other faculty which we have, which is not a thought faculty, is the faculty of awareness. Now this requires the mind to be silent, mind as the intellect, as the reaction from memory. To be silent, you can't decide to silence it. But if you watch the interference of all this, because you are interested in learning and coming upon a deeper order in consciousness, then you may see the danger of approaching that through the thought process, and the thought process can cease. That's a perception. Perception is not a thought process. It includes the senses. It is part of awareness. And it enables you to perceive the danger of approaching in that manner. Then the approach would cease in a natural way, doesn't require any effort on your part if you have perceived the danger. Because when you perceive the danger of something, it doesn't require effort not to court that danger. You just avoid that danger. You don't go towards it. Nature has put an intelligence into our system which doesn't allow us to court danger. So no effort of will is required if there is this perception of at the level of perceiving the danger, which is different from an intellectual conclusion that it is dangerous and I should not take part in it. The should has no place here. The should is created by thought, and thought has no place in this inquiry. So that is the challenge. And when he points this out to the visitor who asked the question, one of the visitors says, that is impossible. I can't give up everything that I have learned and so on. And Krishna says, you don't have to give it up. You just have to become aware of what it can do and what it cannot do, and let it not interfere with what it cannot do. So it's not that thought is evil, but that you have not learned the right use of thought. And you are using it in an area where it has no value, which is ignorance, which is illusion. Because you think that it can do, and in actual fact, it can't do. So this truth also has to be perceived, not merely agreed to. That is why wisdom does not come through some kind of practice of a technique. It is a spirit. And the spirit is not altered by the technique. The spirit is the state of mind or consciousness with which you are approaching that activity. In every activity, you will notice that there is a spirit and there are techniques. The spirit of religion is silence, love, compassion, non-violence. The techniques are what the church or the temple prescribes as the means of worship or rituals and things like that. The rituals can have significance provided you have the right spirit. But to think that the rituals will create the spirit is an illusion. The rituals have significance only when the spirit is there. By themselves, the technique doesn't create the spirit, but the spirit can use the technique with the right understanding. In the same way, in sports, there is this sportsman spirit, and there is the technique of playing the game. So you can learn the technique from someone else, but you can't get the spirit from someone else. The idea of it you can get from someone else, but you have to come upon that spirit in daily life, actually. Then the game becomes completely different from this competitive tussle of two egos. The same we have discussed about the spirit of democracy, which is a spirit of mutual respect and cooperation, and the form of democracy which most democracies in the world have. But the form doesn't function properly because the spirit is missing. You're treating the opposition as an enemy and you cheat in order to win over him and things like that. You identify with your political party and so on, and you want victory at any cost. That's like war. So it creates division. Ideological divisions are based on that. And there's another thing he points out, that giving tremendous importance to systems, the communist system and the capitalist system, or a different economic system. These systems also divide people when you identify with a particular system. And the moment you identify with a particular system, you're no longer caring for the human being. You are more interested in the victory of your system. So that egoistic spirit comes in, and your democratic form doesn't function the way it was intended to function, because it doesn't create cooperation, it creates division, and it creates violence and fighting and all that. So to know this, to understand this deeply, is wisdom. That cooperation, working together, is more essential than the adherence to a particular system or a particular belief or a particular religious form. The spirit is more important than the technique or the method. And when you give too much importance to the method in the system, then you lose the feeling for the individual. And he discusses the question of why we have so much poverty in the world, and some people are extremely rich and some people are extremely poor. In spite of all these systems that we have, you may have ideas about how to go about eliminating poverty, either the communist way or the capitalist way or the socialist way and so on. And your way and ambition in practicing that way becomes more important than the elimination of poverty and the concern for the poor. So he says, why can't we all come together? Forget about the system that you are following. Don't adhere to a system. Just be concerned with eliminating the poverty. So this wrong emphasis on what is the way to eliminate this intellectual division between communists, socialists, and so-called capitalist Democrats is a new form of division which prevents the cooperation. When you see the truth of this, you learn not to adhere to any system, not to identify yourself with any system, with any belief, with any cultural conditioning, and be open so that you can cooperate with the other person. But we are so identified and we become so sure of what we have identified with, which is the nature of the ego. Because the moment you identify, when somebody attacks your religion, you feel it as an attack on you. When somebody criticizes your family, you think it's the criticism of you. So the me becomes predominantly strong. And its desire to protect itself is the creation of the ego. So ultimately, so long as one is caught up in self-concern, which is the ego, this is the root of all disorder. Within the psyche, and therefore in our relationships, in our behavior, everywhere, all through. Because unless there is order in the inner, there cannot be order in the outer. You can try to have order in the outer, but that will destroy the order in the inner, which is what is happening right through the world. And man has not realized the folly of approaching life in this way. That's what I understood Krishnaji to be saying. He takes another example of why we have not been able to eliminate war when it is so obvious that it is so destructive, so cruel, so brutal. And so harmful to everybody. It is easy to show that if we just eschew war as a solution, there will be welfare, much greater welfare right through whole of humanity. Because almost half the revenue of all governments goes into maintaining army, navy, and air force. And if you say we are not going to solve through war, you don't need an army, navy, and air force. That is prevented by this psychological division. We are different from them. And so we are afraid of them. They may attack us and take over our things. And to protect ourselves, we need an army, navy, air force. It becomes counterproductive. You are depending on the ego to defend you, and the ego is the cause of all division and all disorder both inwardly in yourself and in society. So that is the paradox. It's the psychological lack of understanding of all this, which is the illusion, which is causing the disorder, which is responsible for the poverty in the world, because there is enough food to feed everybody. There is enough clothing and shelter to house everybody, provided you don't have this division of mine and theirs. Provided you see the truth of the fact that the other man is yourself, just like you, only conditioned differently, programmed a little differently, because he grows up in another family, in another culture. So that is also exactly like you. You are also adhering to your culture and your religion and so on, as he is doing. So there is no difference. Even in our ignorance, we are similar. And yet we don't feel similar. We feel different. And we don't trust each other. And without trust, there is no friendship, or converse, vice versa. Without friendship, there is no trust. And this lack of trust, lack of friendship, lack of cooperation is the root of this global problem, and also the problem in our own personal lives. And we seem incapable of solving this. So the visitor says to him that, "Sir, what you are asking is impossible. You're asking me to forget all my knowledge and my culture and my nationality and all that." And he says, "But you have been doing all along what is possible. The whole world is doing only what is possible. So we have created the United Nations because that's possible. And the United Nations goes and tries to create an external peace between the communities by saying, agree to this, agree to that, take this land, give that water, and so on in exchange. Some kind of agreement, and we consider that peace. But that peace is constantly destroyed because psychologically, the two communities or the two nationalities are still hating each other, divided from each other. You can see that going on right now in Gaza and Israel and so on. And that's what has gone on right in the Second World War, in the First World War, and so on. So we ourselves are the cause of all these problems. And we keep complaining that why are these problems not getting solved? Because we have the illusion that governments must solve this. And Krishna says governments cannot solve this. Governments are made up of people like you and me who are nationalists, who are using power to dominate and so on. And so unless the individual transforms, you're never going to solve this problem. See the truth of that. Don't talk about possibility and impossibility. Because when you consider it as impossible, you also make it impossible. Your energies won't flow in a direction which says this is impossible. They flow only towards the possible. So he says, you must ask the impossible question because the possible has all been done. And at the end of doing all that is possible for thousands of years, we are where we are. So we have created science that was possible. We have created religions that was possible. We have talked about tolerance and so on, which is possible. The talking, but not the actuality. We have talked about brotherhood of man, It's not the actuality. It has never become the actuality. It's only a concept. So he has pointed out that these concepts fool you. Just because you believe in that doesn't mean you are that way. So unless you have wisdom, unless you have understanding of all this, these problems will never end. And therefore, he wanted to change education. He says the real purpose of education is to reveal all the beauty that is there in life. In every aspect of our life, there is tremendous beauty. Beauty is the joy that you experience in engaging in that activity, whether it is music, whether it's poetry, literature, science, sports, friendship, nature, walk in the nature. There's tremendous beauty, provided you are sensitive. And that sensitivity is also destroyed by the ego, because the ego has ambition and it wants to use time to move in the direction of its ambition. That prevents it from giving attention to what is, because it's trying to go towards what should be, which is fiction. And that never comes about. That ideal never comes about. Because when you approach it with ambition, you are approaching in the wrong spirit. And what you are trying to do will never happen. As you're trying to end the war, but you are not able to end the war. You are trying to have cooperation, but you are not able to have cooperation. You are trying to end poverty, but you are not able to end poverty. When do you realize that you yourself are the problem? The problem is not separate from you. So one of his famous statements made long ago was, the global problem is not separate from the individual problem. Because the root of that is this self-approaching life with self-centered motive. So in essence, I would like to end by stating that the one common illusion of all humanity, everywhere, irrespective of whether they are in America or Africa or India or Japan, is that human beings think that approaching life with self-interest is in their self-interest. That's an illusion. It's not in their self-interest. It appears to be, but what appears is not true. In science too, what appears is not true. You have to discover that that is not true. And so here also, what it appears to you, because you have a very limited vision, is not true. And that's the nature of illusion. It blinds you into thinking that this is true and that the other is impossible. And it becomes impossible because you call it impossible. You think it is impossible. And therefore your energy doesn't flow in that direction. The only possible solution, if at all, is to pay attention, to be aware of this whole issue, including the intellect, the role of the intellect, the interference of logic and conclusions, of ideals in dividing people. Anything that creates division is coming from the ego. What matters is not the quality of the ideal which you are holding in your mind, but the actuality. The actuality is violence and division and so on. Of what good is it to have a very noble ideal and fight over it? So I'll end it here. And next time we begin to discuss Krishnamurti's approach to education, which again is something totally different from what we call education today. But more about that after 2 weeks, because next week we don't have any session, so that you can be free to join the activities of the KFA. Thank you.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. Everyone, you
You're
can put your questions in the chat and Krasimir will read them out. And Professor Krishna will answer them.
Thank you, Donna. Thank you, Professor Krishna. I would like to start by reading the first question from Bhavesh Nekra. What is the right use of thought?
To catch your train,
అవతల అయిపోయిందా
to
చూడు
plan your
కొద్దిగా ఇంకా ఉన్నాయి
moves into the future, all that, but not to solve your psychological problems.
So the next question we have is from Clive Elwell. Why is the world, including human consciousness, of course, in such a terrible mess?
I think we just discussed that in the last 40 minutes. I can't repeat everything that I said in the last 40 minutes. It was concerning the deeper reasons why we have not come upon order in our society, though there is tremendous order in nature, and we are all products of nature. There is that tremendous order also functioning in our body. But strangely, it doesn't function in our consciousness, because we ourselves destroy that order in consciousness. And the child, probably you have that order in consciousness also. But gradually the child is conditioned into all kinds of beliefs and cultural ideas and so on, and division and competition, and ego is promoted in education. All that, of course, contributes to the disorder in the world. So there are deep-rooted causes, but it begins with our own consciousness. And that's why education is probably the only means through which you can bring about a revolution which would be towards a change in the right direction in humanity. But nobody has attempted it. Not even the Krishnamurti schools have been able to attempt that. But if that is the truth, then that's what we should be doing. So our concern is whether that is true or not. Whether what Krishnaji has pointed out is true, then we ignore it at our own peril. because you can't ignore truth. It is there. But if it is not true, then what he is saying is also an illusion. But in order to know whether what he is saying is true or not, you have to examine, you have to be a light unto yourself to discover whether it is true or not true, not merely logically argue and so on. Why is it asking me to confirm my speaking language? It is English.
Yeah, for some reason it has asked me the same. I think you just say English and then save or confirm. You can just say English and confirm it. For some reason it has asked me as well. I think it is some kind of a new feature that they may have added.
Yeah, but they don't give English as an alternative in the, what do you call it, the down thing. Yeah.
In which case you might just cancel the dialogue, that box. You can click cancel.
It doesn't show me the cancellation place either. Funny.
It says, yeah. Oh gosh, what is this?
Okay, cancel. Yeah, gone. Sorry for that interruption. The computer did that.
Professor, are you done with answering the previous question?
Yes, I think so.
Okay. I will read the next question from Prasad Kongara. This question is about the assertion, self-concern is the creation of the ego. We know that lions are territorial and apes are known to exhibit gangster-like behavior. Animals in the wild appear to show emotions like fear and anger, which may be part of nature's design for the organism's survival. How can we be sure that this behavior seen in nature is not ego? If ego is not found in nature, how do I differentiate the behavior in myself that is part of nature from the behavior that is driven by ego and may be unnatural?
One has to go into the question of what is biological fear and what is psychological fear. Biological fear is body intelligence. It is part of the instinct which nature has instilled into the animal and into us. That's what protects you. That's what prevents you from courting danger. But the psychological fears are this identification with a fragment, calling it mine, my country, my religion, my family, my body, and so on. And then being overly concerned about the me and the mine. There are 120 billion people even in India. The world has probably 7 billion. What is so important about this first person singular that I consider that the concern for this one chap, namely me, is the most important? That's what the illusion of the ego is. It's not important. What happens to me is not tremendously important. What happens to the world, to all the people, is tremendously important. and all the species too. What happens to nature is also tremendously. But that becomes part of philosophy, and we consider that this is the practical. So you have to also go into this question of what is practical and what is philosophical. We often think the philosophical is not practical, and that the practical is not philosophical. And so we are all the time doing what we think is practical. And that's what has brought us and the world to where we are. So aren't you going to stop sometime and ask what's going wrong? Why is war not ending? Why is poverty not ending? These are very live questions. We are intelligent enough. We have solved these problems in a limited way. Within the country, we don't accept war. We accept what the court says, Supreme Court says, and we have created a mechanism for solving disputes without recourse to war. And the states don't have armies of their own and so on, they just have a police force to prevent crime. Why we can't do that internationally is because we are all nationalistic. We say my country, and we are concerned only about my country, not the other. You can see that going on, no? Netanyahu doesn't feel a thing for the suffering of the people in Gaza. They are not his people. He's tremendously concerned with a few citizens who are Israelis, if they die or they are, but otherwise he's not shedding a tear for the Palestinians. How does that happen in the mind? It's a psychological process which divides. Where do I divide? Who are we? We have to ask these questions deeply and explore them. How does the mind decide who are we and who are they? These borders don't exist on the ground. They exist in your mind. On the ground, the borders are merely administrative responsibility. Like in states, the government of a state is responsible for the people in its borders, within its borders. So it's really a division of responsibility. Like I'm responsible for looking after my school, but I'm not against other schools. So if you regard the borders of your country in that way, that we are responsible for the welfare of the people in this country, but we are not against any other country, then it's just a responsibility, and the responsibility has to be shared. Also, there is this question of love your neighbor and the sympathy for the other. But that sympathy vanishes when you identify only with the me and the mine. And cruelty comes in. So this is all a psychological process. It doesn't happen in the animal. So don't blame nature for it. And just because animals have a certain amount of instinctive collecting together for the protection of their own species, that's not the real problem for human beings. We are not doing this to protect. We are intelligent enough to know that we are not protecting. We are really destroying ourselves and the earth much more. We have done more harm to all the species in the world, living species in the world. And yet we consider ourselves to be the most intelligent. Something is wrong somewhere, no? We have defined intelligence wrongly. We are not intelligent. If we are intelligent, Why are we not able to solve this very simple problem? We solve mathematical problems and computer problems and so on. We are very intelligent at that. But this simple problem that we shall not kill another human being, we're not able to do it. So we are really not intelligent. Krishnamurti pointed out in some other talk somewhere that there is no intelligence without compassion. And compassion is destroyed by self-interest. That is the problem with us and therefore with the world.
Thank you, Professor. The next question is from Nina, and it is it has a somewhat of a lengthy introduction to it. In the question there is, or in the introduction, there is the term DEIB used, which I looked up. It means diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging. So this was new to me. So I will now read the entirety. In Can the Mind Be Quiet?, Krishnamurti warns that action rooted in identification, even with the best intentions, leads to conflict rather than real change. Without inward order, he says, there can be no real order outwardly. At our school, some DEIB speakers have described the teachings as hijacking the social justice movement. And I hear this reflected in the DEIB system we now use, including the practice of dividing parent meetings into racial affinity groups. When some of us have questioned whether this is in conflict with the spirit of the teachings, we are told the letters to the schools were not meant as a blueprint for the school. There is also the sense that questioning these things could put our jobs at risk. And now the two questions at the end. What happens to this work when questioning itself feels unsafe? And what is our responsibility as educators when the systems we adopt may be moving against the heart of the teachings?
This is a very genuine problem because the school is also a part of society. It's not apart from society, as we are. So, if you are dogmatic about Krishnamurti's teaching and so on, you create also a new division as Krishnamurti people opposed to other people. There is no such thing. There is no Krishnamurti people. There may be people who are interested in Krishnamurti's teachings, other people who are interested in Christ's teachings, and yet others who are interested in Socrates' teaching, and so on. That's normal. That's like saying some people play cricket, some people play football, some people play tennis. When you perceive the difference as only a difference, it doesn't create division. So you have to go into this question, why do some differences create division? And that's a psychological process taking place in our mind. Without freeing ourselves of this process, merely to say, I'm following Krishnamurti's teaching, you can't follow Krishnamurti's teaching. You don't have his wisdom in you. We have gone into that before, that you can't follow a wise man. You have to pursue the wisdom. So what Krishnamurti is saying is an aid to us to come upon wisdom. It's not to solve social problems. There is no direct solution to social problems because the social problems are our own creation and we have to stop creating it. And we'll stop creating it only when we come upon wisdom. So Krishnamurti is merely pointing out various truths. And if we are incapable of seeing those truths, then we are incapable. So ultimately, we get the world and we get the government that we deserve. After all, the Americans are mass scale elected Mr. Trump. And you are getting what you have chosen. See the truth of that. So the answer doesn't lie in the mass. You can't change society outwardly. All that has been tried. No, the communists have tried that. Hitler tried that. Who has not tried that? All demagogues, all dictators have tried that. Has anybody succeeded? No, it's not. Doesn't bring about change. Religious people have tried that. Doesn't bring about change. When will you realize that none of these methods have succeeded? Science has not succeeded. Knowledge has not succeeded in solving this problem. Religions have not succeeded in solving this problem. And none of them, you want to repeat the same thing over and over again. Why? When will you realize that these methods don't work? That's all that Krishna is pointing out. He's saying these things don't work. Which doesn't mean you must not do social good. Of course, do social good. But if you do social good egoistically, you create more disorder than what you are solving. Be aware of that. So can you do social good not egoistic, non-egoistically? That's fine. Because all division destroys love, destroys cooperation, destroys friendship, destroys trust between human beings. And all our problems begin from the psyche. And the psyche has all this violence and division and so on. So how will you solve the problems? We have not been able to solve the problems. When will you accept that we have not been able to solve these problems? We are not intelligent enough to solve these problems. The only thing left is you can probably solve it in your own life. And we are not doing that because we are concerned about the whole world. We are saying, how will the world change if I change? Therefore, even I don't change. The one thing which you could possibly do, you're not doing. Because you are concerned with the larger problem of the whole world. And Krishna is saying, the world problem is not separate from your problem. Solve your problem and learn from it. That will solve the world problem. Not just you, but as many of you as humanly possible. And therefore, it should be part of education, which we are going to discuss next session, 2 weeks later. I find that what he is pointing out seems to me to be true. Whether it's possible or not, it's up to us. He is not saying it is possible, it is easy. He is not giving you an easy solution. There is no easy solution. If there was an easy solution, we would have got it by now. So we are where we are. The question is, what shall we do? Well, come upon wisdom. That's the answer. Without wisdom, it will always go wrong. You can't solve this by having a new system, a new methodology, a new concept, and so on. All that has been tried. What will you do now, which already the Christ has not talked about, or Socrates has not talked about, or Buddha has not talked about. After all these people and after Krishnamurti, we are where we are. Face it. It's no use saying government doesn't agree with Krishnamurti. Of course they won't agree. Government is you and me. And our agreement is very shallow. It's only at the conceptual level. You change only when you come upon wisdom. You don't change just because your ideas change. That's the illusion we have. We want to only change ideas. We think if everybody accepted our ideas, there would be peace, there would be harmony. It's an absurdity. Even within the family, there is not peace. There is not agreement. There is division. Begin there. Solve the problem of your family. Then talk about the rest. You will find that your problems are the same as the world problem.
Thank you, Professor. Next, we have a question from Mark Donahue. Kay says that the solution to most societal problems lies at the level of the individual, not at the collective level. But suppose that individual A actually does achieve what K prescribes. What then would cause the remaining individuals to share in individual A's good fortune?
That's a good question. Because this transformation cannot be spread from one man to another through propaganda. It's not like ideas which can be spread through knowledge or expression or formulae and so on. When you live rightly, your life raises questions for others. As we find that Krishnamurti's life is raising all these questions for us. He has brought these questions. These questions were not being raised by the Theosophical Society. They were talking about noble ideas. All religions have talked about noble ideas and practicing noble ideas and eschewing the ignoble ones. And human beings have tried to do that. Have we succeeded? So when are you going to sit down and look at facts and say, is this method really working? In science, we do. We keep on questioning, we keep on asking, and therefore science progresses. In religion, we don't. We are so sure of our belief, our system. We want to spread that to others. You are spreading your brand of illusion to others. So that's the difficulty of, you can't spread truth. Truth comes through individual perception. Which means what? Which means you can only create this inquiry in another consciousness. You can create it provided that consciousness is willing to inquire. You can force this on them. This was pointed out to Krishnamurti by one of the people in his talks. That man said, "Sir, we have listened to all this from you. We don't need to listen to all these talks. The man on the road does. How is he going to change?" And Krishnaji said, the question in the mind of the man on the road is, where can he get the best beer? You can't force him to inquire into these questions which we are deliberating on. I speak to you because you come and you are interested in these questions. So you can't really change anybody else. But that is no excuse why you shouldn't change yourself. If not for changing the world, do it for changing your own life. It's a precious life. You have only a few more years and so on, and live differently if you want to. If you don't want to, then carry on. Who is forcing you? Krishnamurti is not forcing you, he's just raising questions. If it's not true, just drop it, forget about it.
The next question is from Clive Elwell. What is meant exactly by wisdom?
The understanding of what is, namely the fact, without any distortion from your own consciousness. That is the source of wisdom. It's not an intellectual understanding. It's a holistic understanding which includes your senses and your awareness and so on. So many things we are aware of which we don't think of. So this is the quest for truth. One is not saying truth is easy, truth is simple, come here, you will get the truth. One is not saying that. One is just raising a question about the way we are going about it and pointing out that all those ways have failed. If you don't think so, follow them.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. We have run out of questions for today at the moment. So maybe what I would like to do is to turn it back over to Professor Krishna, Donna, Prasad to say anything you would like to say. And while you're talking, if we get more questions, we can go back to the question portion possibly, or if not, we can conclude earlier.
Well, you can send the questions to me. I will respond like we have done in the past. So we can end the session here. And the only announcements which I wish to make are those I made at the beginning, because some of you may have joined later on. There will be no session next Sunday because the cafe gathering is taking place over that weekend, and people should feel free to join that gathering. We are not in competition with them. 2 weeks later, we will start with questions of education and learning. Education for the transformation of consciousness, not just for learning techniques and methods which will enable us to earn a living in life. That's just a small part of education. The larger part of education is to help the human being to come upon sensitivity, to come upon wisdom, to come upon an understanding of his own consciousness and the responsibility of freeing himself from his conditioning. We'll go into what the implications of all that are, and so on. So this is not an intellectual inquiry. Keep that in mind. The intelligent people have created this world. They are the ones who have created war, the instruments of war. So that kind of education, that kind of learning is not leading us anywhere. It's giving us more power, but not wisdom. And power without wisdom becomes dangerous, which is what we are observing. We have made this world, our own existence, far more dangerous. For millions of years, man didn't have the power or the knowledge to separate himself from nature and use nature as a resource for his own fulfillment of his desires, for economic development and so on. So our desires, our ambition, our self-centered approach to life, to nature, has created all these problems. And we are asking, can we change? Can we realize? It may be too late, but if that is true, that's what we should be doing. Whether it succeeds or not is not in our hands. Thank you.
Professor Krishna,
Yes.
for the next session, other than chapter 30, do you want to give any other recommendation for reading?
Well, that's the field I have been engaging in. So I have a good PowerPoint which summarizes Krishnamurti's approach to education. I would like to begin with that. It is not necessary. And then once we have gone through that, I think you can read the chapters and you will be able to understand yourself what he is saying to individuals about education, because that's probably going to be our last session, or maybe last but one, I don't know. But therefore, I plan to do that. Because I was principal of a Krishnamurti school, so in order to explain Krishnamurti's approach to my teachers, I created this PowerPoint, and I think it applies for all of us. So I want to show that PowerPoint next time to discuss it with you.
Prasad, did you have any other questions?
No, Donna, I'm done with that. I don't have any other questions.
Okay, then remember everyone, next Saturday and Sunday, we will not have a session, and Prasad will send out a reminder. And we'll see you at the KFA meeting if you joined. And thank you so much, Professor Krishna. As
You're welcome.
always, I'm very
Thank you.
grateful.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you. Mhm.